The Book of Margery Kempe was written in mid-15th century Norfolk English, East Anglian English. That's a dialect of English, which is not hugely difficult for modern English speakers to read, but the spelling is very different. So for instance, there are several letters which we no longer have, and also lots of the spellings look very unfamiliar to us. So for instance, the word shall, S-H-A-L-L, is spelt X-A-L, jal, or even jul, X-U-L. And so obviously it's very unfamiliar. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to translate this into modern English, is that I wanted to open this up to a wider audience. Kempe's language itself, or Kempe's scribe's language, is really quite eloquent at times. The challenges it presents to the reader are often about this eloquence. Her sentences often run on and are very long. They can be quite repetitive because that's part of the mystical prose. And you can sometimes lose a pronoun and you're not quite sure who's being talked about. Is it God or her husband, or is it one of the women she's with, or is it herself? But also, it tends to move between the domestic and the abstract and quite spiritual concerns or religious concerns. And the language is really quite varied, and I try to keep that variety in my translation. One of the things that's important to say as a translator from Middle English to Modern English is that a translation is not a simplification. So I've tried to modernize, I've tried to make the book accessible to a modern English readership. What I haven't done is simplify the language, because I've often wanted to keep the complex development of ideas or the complex interrelationship of ideas, and that can be quite challenging. So, for example, one of the similes that Kempe uses is that she will be gnawed at like a rat gnaws at stockfish. And this is obviously a very medieval kind of simile, like rats, stockfish. But I haven't translated that into something else. That's got to keep its kind of power of its context of rats and stockfish. What I did try to do is take away the echoes of the lack of vocabulary that Kempe's scribe has. So often the book will use words like great or worthy or fair, and these adjectives have a huge range of meanings in Middle English, and I've had to kind of work with those. Similarly, one of her favourite words is boisterous, boisterous, and that's a very hard word to translate into modern English. It has slightly different meanings, so I've had to play with that there. But really, the language of the book, I think, requires lots of sensitivity to the echoes that there are in the language. Often there's echoes of saints' lives or biblical echoes, and the choices of words that the scribe made, I think, are designed to evoke some of that in the reader, and I've tried to keep those in there. Obviously, sometimes a footnote's needed to draw that out. In the translation, there's also a modulation, if you like. The spoken language between, say, Kempe and her husband is more casual than the language between Kempe and Jesus, or Kempe and God, when she's having a mystical conversation. And that's, I think, something that's in the Middle English original, and I've tried to keep that in there. And so you get the sense of a reported conversation or an intimate conversation, as opposed to a kind of theological discussion that you have elsewhere.